One of the biggest races of the 2013 iRacing World Tour and IndyCar drivers' biggest event of the year, the month of May brings the drama, excitement, glory and agony to the Indianapolis 500 of iRacing. So far, there have been 3 different winners in the last 3 years, and a number of drivers are still looking for that elusive win, with both Yang Ou and Tim Doyle looking to become the first 2-time winner at the Brickyard. This year sees a change to the rules with not 1 but 2 races, one on Friday night and one on Saturday afternoon. GlacierTV returns for the 4th year as the broadcast provider of the Indianapolis 500 on iRacing, bringing all of the action from the Saturday race. To get into the race, however, drivers will have to endure the toughest qualifying test in all of sim racing. 4 laps, on the limit, millimetres from the wall, leaving it all on the line. And then, you've got 33 cars taking the field for 200 laps, inches apart from each other, working laps of over 230 miles an hour, and they've got to find a way of getting themselves to the front for that final lap around the 2.5 mile racetrack. Welcome to the month of May. Welcome to the greatest spectacle in all of sim racing. Welcome to Indy. Well, Vincent and Jenkins here for the first of GlacierTV ICELounge's look at the 2013 iRacing.com Indianapolis 500. Now, this is a race which over the last 3 years has produced 3 different winners. However, Paul, as we're well now into the month of May, we have to turn our attention to 2 drivers to start this series off. That is Yang Ou and Tim Doyle. Both of them looking to become 2-time winners in the iRacing Indianapolis 500, and importantly, they are the 2 biggest challengers as well.
2 very, very quick drivers, and we know that they do work together, especially for this event. And if past performance is any indication, these guys are just wickedly fast. So they are certainly setting the benchmark for speed and consistency, and if they can stay alive, I think that we're going to be talking a lot about them here in a couple of weeks.
And we'll start first with Tim Doyle. And Tim, he's never really been the best qualifier, but on pure race pace, he really is one of a very select breed who can work their way through the field methodically while keeping a very calm head about it.
Tim Doyle shows a lot of patience in the cockpit, especially in the long races like we're going to be seeing, the 200 lap event here at Indianapolis, 500 miles. You know, easily in excess of 3 hours. It's a very long time to be sitting there. But one thing that really impresses me about Tim Doyle and Yang Ou is their grasp of strategy. They can take a look at a race and work their way backwards in their head. And really, when it comes time, they really do have the strategy worked out, and it's impressive to watch.
You make an important point there as well, because with Tim Doyle and Young, they both will use that alternate strategy. We saw it last year that Tim Doyle will come onto pit road early and he'll work back from lap 200, and you'll know exactly where he needs to be. You're only working on lap 15, 18 for example, and that's going to be incredibly important once again, because that strategy at Indy will be key. And for Tim Doyle, there are very few people as good as him at calling a strategy on the fly when a caution comes out.
Well, we're going to have to see a lot of that. It's the spoils will go to those that can strategize, and I think you're going to be seeing a lot of teams trying to mix it up, trying to do some different things. I do believe that you know, and we can go into this a little bit later on in the podcast, but I think with the way the cars are now, we may see more yellow than we did previously, and that just makes for more you know, a more interesting strategy. Especially in the earlier parts of the race, where a lot of drivers may not be thinking as far forward, but you know, Tim Doyle certainly does have the ability to think his way all the way towards the end of the race in the first few laps, and can strategize accordingly. But definitely the on-the-fly decision-making is where it's at. You know, I mean, professional race teams, you have a crew, you have a strategist, you have all this. Here, you're the driver, you're the strategist, you're the crew chief. You got to do it all, and you got to do it at 240 miles an hour.
And in the purple corner per se, you have Tim Doyle. In the red and yellow corner, you have Yang Ou. And in the last 18 months, 2 years, there really has been no driver in IndyCar as quick, as consistent, and winning as many top-level championships in IndyCar as Yang Ou.
Well, I beat him once. Well, actually, he would have beat me if I didn't get a yellow. But again, it's one thing you can count on is those two cars in the front of the field towards the end of the race, and it's bizarre to think, you know, no matter how far behind they seem to be in the waning moments of the race, somehow they just magically appear. And I mean, it's confounding for the fast drivers to think they might, you know, they might be that far ahead, and hey, man, I might have this thing locked up. And sure enough, you look in the rearview mirrors, and you're going to see something purple or something red and yellow coming at you, and you get that sinking feeling because you know there's nothing to stop the tide.
And if there's anything that could separate Young and Tim, I would have to say for Young, it is that qualifying performance. Let's not forget, he is very, very good at qualifying. He actually holds the world record, not only for a single lap, but also a 4-lap average qualifying at the Brickyard. And when you consider there are some guys who are true qualifying specialists, people like Mitch McCracken, Martin Miller, for example, Yang Ou can still, on his day, just go out there and beat them, and do it by a pretty substantial amount.
It's unbelievable to see. And yeah, I mean, it just seems like no matter at what time or in what venue, he always seems to find it right at the end. And yeah, it's definitely something you see all the time. And we saw this in 16th Street too when he was out there. It's, you know, last few seconds, all of a sudden, bam, there he is. And there he is by a rather commanding margin. He's not just tweaking it up there. He's blasting through this, and it's unbelievable to watch.
And of course, with any big race, you have to think about that pressure as well. And, you know, for both Young and Tim, they've been in that situation of being the first place and the second place car on the racetrack at a big level Indianapolis race. And let's not forget, for Tim Doyle, he was leading the way in the 2011 iRacing Indianapolis 500. He had to hold off Yang Ou in those last couple of laps. In 2012, it was the other way around. Yang Ou was leading the way, Tim Doyle was the one right behind him on those last couple of laps after that late caution in the 2012 race. You know, they've both been in first, they've both been in second. There is so little to choose between each other. But coming into the month of May once again, do you pick Young or do you pick Tim?
Well, I think in a head-to-head knife fight, I think I like Tim a little bit. I think I would put my money on him. Though, again, I mean, if both of them find their way in the front and away from the pack and able to work on each other, it really is going to be a crapshoot. But I like Tim, and here's the reason why I like Tim. You mentioned before Yang Ou. He's a speed specialist. He's fast. He's very, very fast. What he doesn't have that Tim does is the patience of a Tim Doyle. Tim Doyle's fast, but he's also very strategic in that he knows when to make a move. Yang Ou, and we've seen this again in 16th Street, if he gets back in the field, Yang Ou becomes extremely aggressive. He wants to be in the front, and he wants to be in the front at all times. And the reason why is because he's fast. He knows he can check out. Once he gets out in front, he's gone. Tim Doyle, a little more measured in the way he works on somebody, and I think if he can put enough pressure on Young, if he's behind him obviously, then I think he may be able to frustrate him, and that's where you incite mistakes. So I don't think Young. I mean, Young was certainly got the maturity level and the skill not to run into into Tim. So I don't think we're going to see anything like that, but just, you know, in a game of inches and millimeters, just one tiny lapse of concentration or frustration, and you don't go in the direction you want to go. You go backwards. And so, I mean, that's really what I'm alluding to here.
Indeed, and the race you're talking about, of course, the 16th Street Racing League Grand Prix of Laguna Seca, where he was mired back in the field and he had to work his way back up, involved in some incidents, and in fact, Ricky Adatalo then won that race. But you look at the two on paper, you know, Yang Ou was the 2011 iRacing.com Premier Series champion for IndyCar. He won the 2012 iRacing Indianapolis 500, but Tim Doyle, on the other hand, he's won so many championships in the iRacing.com ICELounge official series, and he won the 2011 Indy 500, and you could say as well, the fact that Tim Doyle has raced more in 2013 than Young might prove to be that tiny little bit of an advantage as well.
Well, that's an excellent point. Tim Doyle is a regular IndyCar driver, whereas Yang Ou, he's a special event driver. He comes out for the big events. He comes out for the Indianapolis 500. He came out for the choice ISOWC events. And of course he was a regular driver in the 16th Street event. But of course we've crowned the champion there. So that's on off season. So really, as far as we know, unless he's been doing private testing, I haven't seen a Yang Ou in a race car in quite a long time. This could have a bearing on on race weekend when you get into the traffic and you have to settle down. And for Tim, it's just another weekend. For Young, it's a special event.
So you put aside the Club Atlantic driver and the Scandinavian driver of Yang Ou just for the time being, and you start looking at some of the other guys in the field. And the first one we are going to have to talk about is John Paquin. Now, Paquin has won pretty much everything there is to win an IndyCar. The one thing that has eluded him is an Indianapolis 500 win. In 2010, he was unlucky with about 25 laps to go. In 2011, he barely made it 10% into the race before, in 2012, involved an incident in Mitch McCracken approaching the halfway stage of the race. Now, for Paquin, we haven't seen much about him. We don't even know who he's going to be running this year. If he does run, however, he has got to be a favourite as well. You can always put him in the same bracket as both Young and Tim for pure speed. Unfortunately for Paquin, luck and Indy just haven't gone hand in hand for him at all.
But that bug starts biting you, and you just start thinking about it. I have actually seen a John Paquin shaking down an IndyCar a couple of weeks ago, and of course he showed the speed and everything, but that's really the X factor. Is a John Paquin actually going to strap on the car and go? It's encouraging to see that he has put some time in the car and has put a few laps in just to shake it down. And so I really am hoping that he makes a try for it. I think that, I think it would be the Cinderella story of this whole event if John Paquin can finally nail down the victory he so richly deserves with such skill. And so if he's in the showing, I certainly would like to see him up towards the front. And again, we talked about it. This is a very long race. A lot can happen. And so, we talk about the favorites, but it could be anybody's race.
And of course, both Tim Doyle and Yang Ou represented by Team Nap Racing. John Paquin is a P1 racing driver. It's a team that dominated IndyCar for years in iRacing. However, that team's kind of disbanded a little bit. I know that Ron Black and Marty Sponsler both race in NASCAR. They do a little bit of Grand Am testing, but as a cohesive unit, and I think this would be the one thing that might struggle a little bit for John Paquin. He hasn't driven an IndyCar really in the last year, and the car has changed so much in the last 12 months that it's gonna, in some ways, be a big catch-up game for him.
And it may change again before we're through here. Engineering has discovered a bit of an issue with tires on the car that we haven't seen manifest itself at Indianapolis, but in the first two rounds of the official series, we have not so much at Homestead, but the previous week over at Charlotte, we were suffering some right rear tire failures, and so. Of course, these may or may not be the tires we're going to be seeing at Indy. Now, there's been extensive testing at Indy. I don't think anybody's ever reported this sort of a problem here, but knowing that it's the possibility, there may be some formulation changes with the tires, which may change the car even more. So we may be finding that a lot of people are going to have to figure out different ways of doing things. As it is, with the last with the last build that introduced this problem, at least to that one particular track, it has had an effect on Indianapolis in that, at least from the laps that I've turned and you've turned, it seems to have slowed the car down a little bit. The handling seems to be about the same. Maybe the car pushes a little bit more, but they're not the same cars they were last season. So even then, there's going to be some adjustments made.
And after you talk about the big three of Paquin, Young, and Tim, you've then got to turn your attention to the rest of the field of 33. And we cannot forget the fact that there will be 33 drivers starting on the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend for the 4th running of the iRacing.com Indianapolis 500. And I think to go through the rest of the drivers, you almost have to start looking at teams. I think to start with that, you're going to have to turn your attention to the powerhouse of Broken Arrow. Now, Ryan Norton, for the 2nd year in a row, he's teamed up with Brody Cacciari. And those two drivers, including if they manage to coax Sean Stroud out of retirement, making it a threesome, they really will be some drivers to watch.
Yeah, especially if Sean Stroud comes back. I mean, definitely an Indy specialist. It's unbelievable to see how he can take something that you just can't think of any other way of squeezing 100th or another 10th out of, and he'll find it. And it's unbelievable to see the man at work. But yeah, Team Broken Arrow, Ryan Norton, always very fast at this track, and always seems to have a very good grasp of setups here. I don't think that we're going to see. I haven't really had a chance to see any of Broken Arrow really put a lot of laps in at Indy, but they do seem very quick. I think that they will be at the front of the field towards the start of the race. It's just a matter of strategy and patience. And in the last few races, Ryan Norton really hasn't had a lot of luck with working in traffic, and it's going to make a big deal whether he can stay out of trouble.
Yeah, for Norton, I think he's got a good chance. Again, he's very good at playing strategy. Sometimes it works really well for him, other times not as much. But then you've also got one of the youngest drivers who'll be starting in the field of 33 if he qualifies, in Brandon Traino. And Traino is a very, very, very fast driver. But you have to argue just a little bit that in a long race like this, he needs to keep his cool early on.
Well, especially if he's fighting with somebody. I mean, if he's in traffic and if he's put to pressure, we've seen this occasionally where sometimes he'll become a little impatient and maybe make a move he shouldn't. And I think that when we're talking about the first split, the 4th running of the Indy 500, the one we're going to be watching, you're talking about a lot of drivers have done this before. We're going to talk about pretty much exclusively veterans, and I think that all of these guys know this is a 200-lap race. They're going to be doing this for hours. There's no sense in mixing it up early and getting yourself in trouble early and ending your race. So I'm hoping that the younger guys, the Trainos, and I'm trying to think of some of the other younger drivers that we're going to be seeing. I'm sure you have a list of them, but we'll be talking about them too. But these are the guys that have to sit back and think, all right, 12th place at the start of the race. This is a good spot to be in. Just don't lose touch. Don't lose laps. Don't do something stupid. And you will be there in the end.
And from Broken Arrow, we'll turn our attention over to Vortex Racing. And it seems to be every year there's one team that really comes to the fold and makes a huge impact on the iRacing IndyCar series. In 2011, that was Team Afterburn. In 2012, you could argue that was a mixture of Broken Arrow, Banshee Autosport, and you also had Slowpoke Racing as well. In 2013, you have to say that one standout team has been Vortex Racing.
They have improved in leaps and bounds and shown some impressive speed, and I do think that Vortex is going to put on a pretty good threat. Maybe not race winning contention, but certainly top 5, top 10.
And drivers, you know, you've got a mix in that team as well. You've got people like Gorgon Ujox, for example. He's very, very calm and calculated. But you've also got, again, slightly more aggressive drivers like Philippe Lambert and also TM Hossa. They will be wanting to get to the front if they can. And for the Vortex guys, they do look as though they are very good in traffic from what we've seen of them. They do struggle a little bit with raw pace when they're running out front, however. So I think they're going to be a team, Paul, that will have to rely a little bit on that strategy a little bit more to try and get things going their way.
And you've named 3 drivers that have shown vast improvement in just a year of driving. I've followed Norjox for a while, and I've certainly seen his improvement, especially when it comes to decision making on track and racecraft, and Philippe Lambert the same thing. Definitely, just in the last year, has made leaps and bounds improvements, and it's great to see guys like this get in here and get race time, get some cockpit time in, and really find it's the light bulb goes on, and suddenly you find them plowing towards the front just because they're making better decisions. It's not just the raw speed; it's picking your spots and knowing when to make a move and when to play it smart, and it's just fun to watch these guys.
And from the new to slightly older, a team that really has come back onto the radar the last 6 months, Good Old Boys Racing, and you have to say that Daniel Kendall really has got that unit working very well the last 6 months.
Well, there's a name I haven't heard since I started. Yeah. They're going to be kind of the X factor in this. It remains to be seen if they can actually find the speed they're looking for. One of the things we're going to be seeing absolutely is an extremely tight qualifier here, and I'm just hoping that they can figure out enough to get into the show.
And again, they're a team that actually have improved not only in race pace but in qualifying as well. We've seen that the previous 2 weeks in the iRacing.com Eyes on IndyCar series. And Good Old Boys, they're a team, that a year and a half ago they did look as though that they were fading away, but they've kind of come back into the fold. It's really good to see them coming back in. And talk about old teams, you've also got to talk about Panther Online Racing. That unit, which was at one point ludicrous with Niles Anders and Monica Clara Brown, it's kind of evolved over the last year. Now it's got Chris Cahoe, it's got Scott and Chris Manifold, it's got Joe Branch in there who transferred over from Team Afterburn, and then you've got people like James McClure and also Nefriag. They are really, really fast when they get their stuff together, and last year they did a reasonable showing. This year I think that they could do really well, and we've seen Niles Anders back onto the racetrack for the first time in God knows how long.
It's great to see Niles Anders back. It really is, and I really wish the best for him. And really, anybody who comes back into the IndyCar is more than welcome. And we just love to see all these guys coming back and getting back in the car and reigniting that flame. I want to go back. You talked about you named 2 people that I want to talk about. We'll start with Nefriag. Definitely somebody who's shown some super speedway speed, and I think if Nefri can just find that just tiny bit more, he's gonna dominate because he's got the racecraft already to do it. Again, this is another team that may not have it in raw speed, but will definitely make up for it in racecraft. And you mentioned Joe Branch, and here's a guy, and this is something we should probably talk about too, is for lack of a better adjective, cross-pollination. We're talking about like Slowpoke Racing and Team Afterburn, which have both sort of kind of broken up and re-evolved in other teams. But you've got a lot of these players in these 2 teams that were very, very fast and have now found alliances and allegiances with other teams, and they bring that knowledge and experience with them. So you see other teams getting faster and getting better. So Joe Branch is a product of one of those where he's gotten on with these guys, and I think their raw speed is certainly has certainly increased, and Joe Branch, with such a great team, is is a benefactor of that too, with such great teammates and all this.
And we've talked about part of Team Lap Racing, of course, Yang Ou, Tim Doyle. Let's turn our attention to the rest of that team. People like Courtney Taylor and Tim Holgate. Now, Courtney, I know, might be busy around this time of year, but who can forget the heartbreak he had in the 16th Street Racing League, Indianapolis 400, when on the last lap of the race he went from 3rd down to 11th. The rest of the team, it's all about pure talent there, and not only those two, but that entire team really does have all the boxes working for them.
I talked to Tim Holgate after that race, and he was really disappointed. He put a lot of work into that, and was really just upset with himself for that situation. And I think that it's, you can either become discouraged or you can become determined, and I think that Tim Holgate has become determined to kind of redeem himself with that. Now, it remains to be seen whether or not Tim Holgate actually does race this race or not. But if he does, I think you're going to see a guy who's very hungry to make a good showing.
Turning our attention next to Banshee Autosport and AeroX Racing. Now, we always put those teams one as the same. We'll start with Banshee Autosport, and they've recruited Alexi Aloma to work with them for the Indianapolis 500. Alexi being, of course, one of the World Championship Series drivers. But you've got a lot of talent in that team. Their only issue is a lot of those guys aren't going to be racing this year. And is that going to have an impact on their team's preparation?
I think the preparation, no. The actual race, yes, I believe it will make an impact because, again, a majority of the team is going to be in Indianapolis at the track, thereby not being able to race. So you may see some of the guys you haven't heard a lot from in Banshee before. And but I think preparation-wise, the team as a cohesive unit is working very hard. And so I think that the guys that will be representing Banshee will make a good showing. Again, the more people to support the team, the better. So, unfortunately, I think that, well, it's fortunate for the guys who are going to be in Indianapolis partying it up, which will not be one of them, poo. But I think that the rest of the team, I think, is a cohesive enough unit. I think you'll be surprised to see some of the Banshee guys making a run for it.
And of course, you have to focus on one driver for Banshee, and that is going to be Martin Miller, because he really is this year's Mitch McCracken in the fact he has been a standout driver in testing. His qualifying speed has been astronomical, and that guy behind the wheel is just so damn smooth.
Martin Miller is a machine, and there's only one other way to say it. He really is a machine. And when I say that, I mean in his driving. He's focused, he's determined, and he just doesn't seem to make mistakes. And so I think if we can see the Martin Miller machine flawless at Indy, we're going to put up a real credible threat. But let's talk about Martin Miller in terms of his mechanical acumen too. Here is a guy who really has discovered a lot about the car and really has an understanding of how things operate with this car. And I think it's not only benefiting the team, but it's also benefiting Martin in terms of his confidence and his ability to understand in the car during the race, hey, this is happening, so I need to do this. And that's going to make a big difference when you're talking about just trying to find that thousandth of a second per lap to try and close in on somebody. Making the right adjustments in car during the race is going to make a big difference.
Of course, Banshee Autosport also have the first and second place drivers from the 2012 rookie iRacing Indianapolis 500 in James Swinbanks and David Ward. And that's always interesting to see as well, the rookie Indianapolis 500. The top split of that really has produced over the years some great drivers who's gone on to big successes in the big race.
It does. Again, it's you kind of look at that as like the I wouldn't really call it Indy Lights because it's the same race, but in some ways it is. But in some ways, the rookie race is actually harder than the Premier, the A-class race, because you have such a wider variance of talent in that race. And as such, you have to be much more aware of your surroundings. You have to be much more of a careful driver. You don't necessarily know what the guy you're overtaking is going to do. Whereas in the top split of the A race, you've raced with these guys before. Everybody there has raced with everybody else before. You have some information, some intel on what these guys are going to do. So you talk about a James Swinbanks who has really just poured his heart and soul into this car and learning it and becoming a better racer, and teaming up with Banshee. Teaming up with Banshee and Aero X. I think that you're going to find that the maturity level of a James Swinbanks is definitely going to be an asset when it comes to long races and strategy and working as a team. And it's really exciting to see him come up.
And a couple of more things to talk about before we move on. The first one of them being Team No Bueno. Now, aside from all the animated GIFs, these team really does have some good speed as well. They've got close ties to Broken Arrow, but they keep themselves as a separate unit. And people like Andrew King, for example, Rob Eugelinks, they are going to be drivers who won't necessarily be running at the front at the start of the race, but if they play their cards right, could be there at least in the top 5 towards the end.
And you're talking about a team that has been kind of frustrated with their speed, and they've been working very, very hard to try and find just a little bit extra. But again, in the face of such engineering talent as the other teams we have talked about already, you're going to find, I think, the teams like No Bueno are very, very rich in talent, very, very rich in setup acumen. And it really, when you think about it, all of these teams are very schooled in how to set up a race car and how to set up a race strategy. But when you're talking about the elite that you're going to be seeing during this race, there can only be one winner. There can only be one second place car. And you know, it's such tight competition at the front, and I think especially if we see a lot of yellow flags, it's going to keep the field tight together. We'll be very surprised to see teams that might have been frustrated and struggling for the next couple of weeks trying to find the speed, suddenly finding themselves in positions that they weren't expecting and have the ability to put on an excellent showing.
And then you've got Nexus Esports, which last year was a real credible threat. This year, you have to say, they've still got the speed. I mean, Donnie Nelms, Mike Larson, Matthew Lambertson, they've got 3 very good drivers there. They kind of struggled, though, with a lot of personnel changes in the last 6 to 8 months.
They have. They've been decimated by some defections, and the team is sort of split in concentration at this point. A lot of work being done on roadside and other disciplines. So the IndyCar program at Nexus, it has been suffering a little bit, and I think it's frustrating for them, but you know, they're doing the best with what they can. They do have a lot of old information that they're trying to work with. Again, the car has changed, but the car is not astronomically changed. It's just a matter of trying to figure out, with the new tire compounds and the new downforce packages, what's changed and how you can make an adjustment on that. So they're working very, very hard. I certainly wouldn't discount them in the long run, but they've got some work to do if they want to find themselves at the front.
And then, of course, you've got to talk about the privateers, and you've got some great privateers in that list. People like Brian Bannerman. You've also got Randy Freeman. You've got Bud Weishart, for example. These are drivers. I mean, Freeman and Weishart, for example, these are drivers that you come into Indianapolis, you know are going to be running in the top 10, period.
And when you think iRacing and Indianapolis, the name Bud Weishart is very high on the top of the list. This is his race. This is what he does. He spends all of his time trying to perfect his racecraft and his setup acumen at Indianapolis. So, I mean, this is it for him. This is what he does. And I think you're going to find that he is really going to be a contender just for sheer number of laps that he's put on here. Here's a guy who knows the way around this track, hey, he's seen it all. He's seen it all at this track. And it's going to be interesting to see if he can find enough speed to just stay where he needs to be able to make his moves at the end of the race. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun to watch, and Budweiser to work, because he's just so creative in ways to get around with a car that might not be as blazingly fast as everyone else.
So we've talked about pretty much all of the teams. We've talked about a number of the privateers. Question's going to be, who is going to be drinking that virtual milk at the end of the 2013 iRacing Indianapolis 500? Do you want to do it as a team, or do you want to do it as a driver?
Oh man, well, that is such a tough question. I mean, you're trying to pick the winning horse 3 weeks before the race. A lot can change between here and there. I think if Yang Ou and Tim Doyle are in the race, again, I think I would tip the hat to a Tim Doyle. I just think that, given that this is the fourth time they've, they're both going for the second championship. I just think that the experience level of a Tim Doyle is going to rise to the top here. But again, you're talking about 500 miles of racing. You're talking about, I will imagine that with the yellows, we're going to see pretty close to 3 hours in a race car. That's a daunting task for a lot of people. You've got to maintain your concentration. You've got to maintain your strategy. You've got a lot of things you're thinking about, and it literally is anybody's race.
Want to know my pick?
Hey, Will, who do you think you're going to go with?
Randy Freeman.
Randy Freeman, very fast, very determined. May not have the raw speed, but is a strategist and is very quick around here. So that's an interesting pick, but I don't think you're off. I don't think you're off on a Mars here.
Well, that is the first part of our podcast. We were going to do two bits together, but what we're going to do is we're going to stop the tape here, then we're immediately going to start recording. So you're going to get both parts, but it's going to make it easier for you to view it again on YouTube, blah, 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 blah. But that is our look at the teams and drivers who we think will be making up the field of 33 in the 2013 iRacing.com Indianapolis 500. Now, don't forget, there are 2 races this year. One of them will be held on Friday, the 24th of May 2013, and then the big race itself live on PSR TV on Saturday, the 25th of May. For more information, head over to iRacing.com. And we'll see you on the other side.